In today's video, I'll be doing a Clash Royale tier list for the month of July, where I'll be ranking every single card in the game, also all the evolutions and the tower troops too. The meta is completely different from a month ago because we recently had balance changes where there were a lot of cards nerfed, and one of them nerfed was the Dagger Duchess. So now the meta has completely shifted. We also have the Goblin Giant evolution in the game, as well as the Goblin Drill evolution too. As always, S tier means the card is very strong, incredibly versatile, and there's a good chance it needs a nerf. A tier means the card is well above average. B tier is the upper end of average. C tier, the lower end of average. D tier means the card is well below average, but maybe doesn't quite need a buff. F tier means the card is not versatile at all, and there's a good chance it could use a small buff. Starting off with the Bomber, I'm going to put it in A tier. And just a note, guys, I'm talking about the regular Bomber. All the evolutions I'll be ranking separately at the end. The regular Bomber has been very good recently, partly because of the Evolved Goblin Drill. So many people are using it with the Evolved Goblin Drill and also as a way to counter it. Not only is it good in cycle decks, you can also use it in Lava Hound, and it just simply gets so much value for only 2 elixir. The Bomb Tower is also going in A tier. Ever since the Tesla got a small nerf in the last bounce change, a lot more people have been using the Bomb Tower again. It has a lot of hit points for only 4 elixir, and the splash damage it deals is also incredibly valuable. It's pretty versatile too among cycle decks. You can use it with the Hog Rider, you can use it with the Goblin Drill, you can use it with Royal Hogs, you can even use it in things like Loon Cycle, and it's also a pretty decent counter to the Goblin Drill as well. The Bowler's also going in A tier. This is another card that gets a lot of value. First of all, on defense, because of the knockback he deals pushing things back, he also has a ton of hit points, so spells are not good against him. And then even on offense, when things are in front of him and he's close enough, he can end up throwing his boulders, hitting the unit, and also splashing the tower at the same time. The only reason why he's not S tier is because he's not super versatile, but inside of things like Lumberloon Freeze and with Giant Graveyard or inside of Giant decks in general, he is an amazing support card to have. The Cannon's going to go in B tier. It's a pretty good building for only 3 elixir, but the problem for it is buildings like the Bomb Tower and the Tesla are just significantly stronger than it at the moment, which is why for the most part, the Cannon you're mostly only going to see in Hog decks and inside of Royal Hog Cycle. But even inside of Hog, a lot of people are preferring to use the Bomb Tower or the Tesla over the Cannon. The Cannon card's going to go in D tier. It's up a tier from the last tier list where I put it in F tier because after the Dagger Duchess nerf, it's slightly better, and if you really want to, you can use it in things like P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam or inside of Mortar. But with that being said, there are going to be better options than it, but the Cannon card is viable if you really want to use it. The Clone is going to be the first card going in F tier. It has been a spell that has been pretty bad recently, and even things like Lava Clone and Giant Skeleton Clone have not been having much success recently. There's just too many counters such as the arrows, the poison, and the tornado that cloned units have a pretty difficult time getting value. The Dark Prince is going to go in B tier. It's a pretty good splash card that pairs very well with the Giant, which a lot more people are using now, especially after the Prince buff. More people are using the Dark Prince because the Dark Prince pairs, of course, very well with the Prince, and also some people are using it with the Evolved Goblin Giant, but overall, it's not super strong and it's fairly easy to deal with, so I think B tier is a pretty fair ranking. The Dark Goblin's going to go in B tier also. He's been a bit better recently ever since he got that damage buff a couple months ago. He's been seen a lot more inside of bait decks. But with that being said, there's a lot of people running arrows and log, which of course are very effective ways to take him out. And he's not seen that much in Mortar, so it's mostly bait for the most part, which means he's not that versatile overall. The Earthquake is going to go in B tier. It of course is a very good spell to have paired with the Hog Rider or even with the Royal Hogs and Royal Hog Cycle because it's going to allow you to break through buildings. But I think it is worse now that the Void is in the game because a lot of people prefer to use Void instead of the Earthquake simply because of how much stronger it is in a lot of situations, which is why I think the Earthquake is only B tier at the moment. The Baby Dragon's going to go in C tier. It's a decent flying splash card, but the main issue for the Baby Dragon is things like the Phoenix are just so much stronger, and in pretty much every single deck, you would rather have the Phoenix over the baby dragon. But if you really want to, you can of course use the baby dragon in things like Golem or with Graveyard, so it's viable, but just not the best option in most situations. The Electro Drag is going in D tier. Golem is simply just not in a great position, so there's not as many people running the Electro Drag because Elixir Collector is a lot worse, so there's less Golem, and also Void is really good against the E-Drag too, which leads it to not being played very much. The Electro Giant's going to go in C tier. I think it's a slightly below average win condition now because there's a lot of good buildings in the meta that counter it. There's a ton of people running the Bomb Tower, the Tesla, the Evolved Tesla, and even the Goblin Drill is going to be pretty good when used defensively when defending the Electro Giant, so it can be pretty challenging for the Electro Giant to reach the tower in a lot of matchups. The Electro Spirit's going to go in A tier. It's a card that gets a lot of value for only one elixir. It also is quite versatile, especially in cycle decks. You can use it with the Expo, you can use it with the Hog Rider, you can use it with the Goblin Drill, and you can even use it in heavier decks too, like the Royal Giant, for example. So there's a lot of different things you can use it with and pair it with. The Electro Wizard's going to go in C tier. I think he's in a slightly better spot this meta after the Dagger Duchess nerf, and also because P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam is in a very good spot, as well as Giant, which the E-Wiz pairs well in. I'm seeing him used a bit more as a support card. The E-Barbs are going to go in D tier. There's just simply not really a deck that they fit in that you need to use them in. I mean, you could use them in things like Golem if you want to, or on mid-ladder. Of course, you run into them when they're over-leveled, and that's super obnoxious, but at the end of the day, not that strong, and they're fairly easy to counter if you know what you're doing. The Elixir Collector is going to go in D tier. Man, this card fell off a ton ever since Void was added to the game. Now there's two cards that pretty much fully counter it. The Void as well as the Earthquake, which makes it incredibly difficult for the Elixir Collector to get any sort of value in this meta, which is why you almost never see it anymore. Believe it or not, guys, the Elixir Golem is going in B tier. It is pretty decent in this meta. I think a big reason why is because the Void pairs very well with the Elixir Golem, as well as the Evolved Wizard, which are two very strong cards, which has really helped the Elixir Golem out, and now it's at the point where it's an average win condition in the game, which is kind of hard to believe. The Executioner is going to go in C tier. Kind of like the E-Wiz, I've seen a bit more people use him recently inside of things like Ex-NATO Balloon, and also with the Goblin Drill, you can use the Executioner as well. He's going to be a very effective counter to air cards like the Lava Loon, and also he can be pretty annoying when he crosses over the bridge, pairing a Tornado with him and trying to line things up with the tower. The Fireball is going to go in A tier. That direct damage is very nice to have sometimes in certain decks. Fireball is a pretty versatile medium spell overall. You can use it in heavier decks like with the Royal Giant and the Giant, and of course you can use it in faster cycle decks like with the Expo, the Hog Rider, and the Goblin Drill, so a pretty well-rounded spell overall. The Firecracker is going to go in C tier. In the last couple tier lists, I put her in D tier because for the most part, only mid-ladder players were running her, but now there's people running her again at the top of ladder. I think a big reason why is because of the Dagger Duchess nerf, so there's a lot more people running Hog again, which of course the Firecracker pairs very well in. I think the only reason that keeps her from being any higher than C tier is because of how many people are running Arrows and Void, which are just direct counters to her, which is why you don't see her a ton at the very top of ladder. The Fire Spirit's going to go in B tier. I don't think it's quite as good as the Electro Spirit, certainly not as versatile, but for one elixir, it deals so much DPS, and it's incredible to have in things like Logbait and also with the Goblin Drill. The Fisherman's going in A tier, which is higher than I normally place him. There's so many people running Royal Giant in this current meta that I think this ranking is justified, because he's also used in some other decks outside of Royal Giant. For example, with the Giant Skeleton in some decks, or with the Goblin Giant. He's very good for king activations and pulling things away from your win condition, and he just gets so much value for only 3 elixir and has quite a lot of hit points too. He doesn't even die to a fireball. The Flying Machine's going to go in C tier. It's slightly better after the Dagger Duchess nerf, but I still never see it in Lava Hound decks. I only see it from time to time with the recruits, so I still think it's a slightly below average card, but definitely viable once again. The freeze is going to go in D tier, definitely better than the clone. It's seen a lot more frequently inside of graveyard freeze, and even from time to time, you still see Lumberloon freeze or another type of deck have the freeze inside a balloon. So I think it is barely viable, definitely a weaker spell, but you can use it if you want to. The Barbarian Barrel is going to go in B tier. You'll commonly see it inside of things like Royal Giant or with the Electro Giant, but you don't see it as often with Graveyard anymore, because a lot of Graveyard decks nowadays prefer to have things like the arrows instead of the Barbarian Barrel, so I don't think it's quite as good as it used to be. But with that being said, it's still nice when you're trying to get a tiny bit of chip damage, or pair it with your counter push, or you can use it defensively too because you have that Barbarian that comes out, so it's a decent spell all around. The Archer Queen is going to go in B tier. I think she's a lot better now after the Little Prince got nerfed again for another time. She is being used significantly more. I think the one thing that prevents the Archer Queen from being higher than B tier is of how many people are using the Void, which is just such a good counter to her that prevents her from being used a lot more. The Furnace, as per usual, is going in F tier. Once again, the Dagger Duchess can just pretty much fully counter it without you having to do anything. It's also just way too vulnerable to spells like the Earthquake and the Poison, and you just can't really use it in any deck. There's just no reason to use the Furnace. The Giant's going to be going in A tier. It has recently been one of the strongest win conditions in the game. There's a lot of different Giant variants you can play. For example, a lot of people are running Giant with the newly buffed Prince. That is really good again. There's some people, though, running Giant Graveyard. Some people are running Giant Sparky. And there's even some people running Giant Loon. So there's so many different variations of it you can use, making it very versatile. And he just has so many hit points, getting you an incredible amount of value. The Giant Skeleton's going to go in C tier. I don't necessarily think he's a bad card. I think he just has a hard time fitting in decks because he's more of a substitute card. Sure, he has a lot of health and the Death Bomb deals a lot of damage, which can get a lot of value in a lot of situations. But for example, inside of Hog decks, you could use the Giant Skeleton, but a lot of people prefer to use the Mighty Miner. And in Royal Giant, you could pair him with the Giant Skeleton, but a lot of people would prefer to use a faster cycle RG deck. So he's just never a requirement. The Giant Snowball is going to go in B tier. This card pairs amazingly inside of Giant Graveyard, inside of Balloon decks. You could use it with the Ram Rider 2 and inside of Lava Hound. Because of the pushback, pushing things away from your win condition, slowing it down, buying the unit more time to reach the tower can be so useful in so many situations. Also, defensively, knocking back something, let's say you're defending a Hog Rider, for example, knock it back, and then you have a couple more seconds to deal with it and take it out, so it gets a lot of value in so many situations. The regular Goblin Barrel is going to go in C tier. There's not too many people just using the regular version. Most people running the Goblin Barrel are using the Evolved version, which gets a bit more value, so they're eventually trying to get to that Evo version, but the standard one isn't seen a whole awful lot because of course it's so easy to deal with things just like the log and the arrows, which are so prevalent in the meta. The Battle Ram is actually going in B tier, which is a lot higher than I normally rank it. I think the biggest reason why is P.E.K.K.A is in such an incredible spot in this current meta, and most P.E.K.K.A players at the moment are preferring to use the Battle Ram over the Ram Rider, which has really brought up the Battle Ram's usage rate, and surprisingly, people are able to end up having it reach the tower, even with all the buildings in the current meta. The regular Barbarians are going in D tier. The main reason people play the Barbarians is to get the Evo ones. The standard ones are just significantly weaker. They die to Fireball. They're not very versatile. You're only going to be able to run them in something like a Lava Hound deck. And even then, most of the people running the Barbarians inside of Lava have the Evolved version. The Goblin Cage is going to go in C tier. It recently got a small buff, but it hasn't helped it too much. For the most part, you're only going to see it occasionally with the recruits or inside of a balloon deck from time to time, but that's going to be about it. Man, oh man, did the Goblin Curse fall off after the massive nerf it got a couple weeks ago. There's hardly anyone running it anymore. I can't even name a specific deck where you're constantly seeing it in. Now, at this point, it's kind of like you could use it in your deck if you really want to, but now people are realizing most other spells are going to be more valuable than it. So I have it in D tier because there's just not too many people people playing it anymore after the massive nerf. The Goblin Demolisher, on the other hand, still remains to be very strong after the nerfs he received, which is why he's going in A tier. Especially paired with the Goblin Drill, he gets an insane amount of value. He's also very good as a support card in heavier decks, like with P.E.K.K.A, for example. He still deals a very solid amount of death damage, and he can just be really annoying to deal with in a lot of situations. The Goblin Drill is going to go in A tier. I truly do not think the regular Goblin Drill is an S tier card. A big part of why so many people are using it is to eventually get to the evolved version, but with that being said, the standard one is still very strong, and maybe not even just strong, but it's also quite versatile. There's a lot of different drill variations you can use. You can use a ton of different evolutions with the drill as well, giving you a whole lot of options. But I do believe the regular one isn't super challenging to deal with, especially compared to the evolved version. And at the top of ladder, almost everyone running the Goblin Drill has the Evo version, and they're not just using the regular one, which is why I put it in A tier. The Goblin Gang is going all the way up in A tier. The Dagger Duchess nerfed has helped the Goblin Gang so much. Also, the Spear Goblins recently got buffed, which of course is a buff to the Goblin Gang, which has Spear Goblins. There's so many different decks you're seeing it in now, not even just inside of Bait, but you're also seeing it inside of Mortar. You're seeing it inside of Baity Recruit spam decks. You're even seeing it with Goblin Giant Bait spam decks. So it is just very versatile at the moment and so much better now that the Duchess is worse. The healer's going to go in D tier. There's pretty much no one running Golem healer, and there's also no one really running Elixir Golem with the healer either. So she's in a bad spot. All the Elixir Golem decks you're seeing in the meta are preferring to use the Skeleton King over her, the Evolved Wizard, and the Void. You don't really see healer in those decks, so she's very weak. The regular Goblin Giant's going to go in D tier. Pretty much no one is running the regular version. Everyone using the Goblin Giant has the evolved version. The regular one is just simply very weak. You have a very difficult time getting him to the tower, especially if the other person has a building, and there's just a hard deck to pair the regular one in, which is why almost everyone now is running the Evo version. The archers are also going in D tier. There's just way too many people running arrows in this meta for them to get any sort of value. Everyone running the archers, same thing as I said for the Goblin Giant, are running the evolved archers. They're typically only seen inside of Expo 2, so not that versatile. When you do see the regular archers, it's pretty much going to be Expo every single time, but it's almost always evolved archers 99% of the time nowadays. Probably no surprises here. The Barbarian Hut is going in F tier with the Furnace. Same thing as the Furnace, Earthquake, Poison, other spells going to be really good against it, and there's just not really any deck you can play the Barbarian Hut in where you can justify it and say it's a better card to have than pretty much all the other cards in the game. The Bandit's going to be going in A tier, an absolutely incredible card in this current meta because of how many people are running the P.E.K.K.A. And unlike the Battle Ram, because of course some people like running the Ram Rider, the Bandit on the other hand is used in pretty much every single P.E.K.K.A. deck almost 100% of the time. She deals good pressure, she can be annoying to deal with, and she's fairly cheap, so just gets a lot of value, and you can also use her with the Mega Knight as well, which you occasionally see. The Goblin Hut is going to be going in F tier, same thing as the Furnace and the Barbarian Hut. It's just too weak to spells, and there's just never a good deck in the meta where you're gonna say, oh, I know what this needs. It needs a Goblin Hut. It just simply doesn't happen. The Goblin Machine is going in F tier. I'm not gonna lie, guys. The last set of nerfs it got might have been a little bit too far. There's no one running the Goblin Machine anymore. I truly believe it is worse than the Goblin Curse even. There's just no one playing it. It is so weak. I can't think of a single deck you want to use it in. So for that reason, I think it wouldn't hurt to give it a small buff. I realize we don't have a card in S tier yet, but I think Goblins are going to be the first one, and I think they barely earn that spot. You could argue they're A tier, but I do believe at the moment the Goblins are a bit stronger than they were last month. They're being used currently slightly more than the Guards, and the Guards I actually put in S tier last month because of how many people were running them and how good they were. The Goblins pair very well with the Hog Rider and the Goblin Drill, which we see a lot more now. The Goblins are also better after the Dagger Duchess nerf. the Duchess was pretty good against the Goblins, so there were less people running them. But now that the Princess Tower is the best tower troop, the Goblins are back, and so many people are using them, and the fact that you get 4 Goblins for only 2 Elixir gets you a ton of value in so many situations, and of course they're a very versatile card because you can run them in heavier decks too, with the Royal Giant for example, so they're not just excluded to only cycle decks. The Golden Knight's going to go in D tier, definitely the weakest champion in the game in my opinion. You can use him if you really want to inside of a drill deck with the Tornado or maybe with the Electro Giant, but there's just going to be so many better options. In fact, all the champions I would say are better than him, so I would say he could get a small buff that would probably be okay, but I don't think he's absolutely horrendous because he could still be used from time to time. The Golem will also be joining the Golden Knight in the D tier. I think the biggest problem with Golem is nowadays you pretty much have to pair it with the Elixir Collector in order to use it, but the problem is the Elixir Collector is so bad in this current meta because of the Void that alongside of no one using Elixir Collector, there's not really anyone running the Golem either, which is why it's one of the worst win conditions in the current meta. Graveyard's gonna go in B tier, definitely not super OP in the current meta, and there's not a whole lot of people running Splash Yard anymore. At the moment, the main Graveyard deck you're gonna run into is Giant Graveyard, but there's a lot of people running the Giant and not using the Graveyard with it. So I feel like the Graveyard isn't as oppressive of a win condition as it used to be, but I still think it's an above average win condition for sure. The guards are going to be going in A tier. They are incredibly strong. I just think they're slightly worse than the goblins. One of the main differences between the guards and the goblins is the guards tend to be played in heavier decks typically. So the guards are commonly seen with the Lava Hound and the Giant, for example, whereas the goblins will typically be in cycle decks. But the guards are very valuable because of course they don't die to arrows. So whenever you use them against an arrow deck, they are still able to get a lot of value throughout the match typically. The Heal Spirit's going to go in D tier, definitely the worst spirit in the game. There's not really any deck that requires it. It's the type of thing where it's like you could use it if you want to, perhaps inside of a bridge spam deck or with Sparky, but most of the time there's just going to be better options. The Hog Rider's going to go in A tier for sure. He is one of the strongest win conditions in the game again after the Dagger Duchess nerf. There's tons of different Hog variants you can run. Of course, you can use him with the Firecracker if you want. You could use him with the Musketeer though. Tons of different buildings you can play him with. You could use him with the Bomb Tower. You could use him with the Tesla, the Cannon. Lots of different evolutions you can use with him. Just tons of versatility everywhere, and he can be very difficult to deal with, especially if you don't have a tornado or a building. The Hunter's going to go in D tier. Pretty much the only deck you would ever see him in is going to be with the Royal Giant, but even inside of Royal Giant, there's better substitutes. Like the Phoenix, for example, you're going to see significantly more inside of RG than the Hunter, so there's just not really a reason to run him. The Ice Golem's going to go in C tier. I think the biggest problem is it's not that versatile for the most part. You're only going to see it paired with the Hog Rider or inside of Loon Cycle, but when it is played in those decks, it does tend to get a lot of usage and value for only 2 Elixir, and it has good synergy with those specific decks. The Ice Spirit's gonna go in S tier. I would say it is definitely the best spirit in the game, even slightly better than the Electro Spirit currently. You can use it in pretty much any cycle deck you can think of, like with the Hog Rider, with the Expo, with the Goblin Drill, Royal Hog Cycle, you name it. It just gets a lot of value defensively for only 1 Elixir, freezing cards right in their tracks, buying you significantly more value to take them out. And the arrows are definitely going in S tier too. They have just been used a ton recently in a variety of different decks and archetypes. Obviously, you can use them in things like Giant Graveyard. There's some people running them in P.E.K.K.A. now. Lava Hound, people have known that they've been played in for a very long time. Elixir Golem, Giant, even some cycle decks you could run them in if you want to, like Mortar, for example, Recruit Spam. Tons of different decks you can play them in. They just get a lot of value, taking out things for only 3 Elixir with a very large radius, and some people even think it might be time for them to get a small nerf. The Balloon is going to be going in A tier, definitely one of the strongest win conditions in this meta. Oftentimes it is paired with the Lava Hound, but a lot of times you don't even see it with the Lava. You can also run it with the Giant, you can use X NATO Balloon, you can run Lumber Loon Freeze, and it is just very decent, especially paired with things like the Void, which is a very strong spell at the moment. And even though there's a lot of buildings like the Tesla, which are pretty good against the balloon, you can oftentimes find a way to break through them, especially with your support cards and your tank in front. The bets are going to go in C tier. You can use them in some spammy decks if you want to, like inside of Mega Knight Wall Breakers or in a faster Cycle Miner Wall Breaker deck, but I think overall they're pretty weak and very vulnerable to spells and a lot of units. I think one of the main reasons people run them, which is a case for a lot of the evolutions, is to eventually get to the evolved bats, which are significantly stronger. The Ice Wizard's going to be going in D tier. You don't really see him anymore. Even inside of things like Splash Yard, he's kind of replaced by things like the Little Prince now. And Ice Bow, you could use him in if you want, but other Expo decks like 3.0 are typically going to be a lot stronger. The Inferno Drag is going to be in B tier. Definitely a very solid card that is going to be great against tanks, but I don't think it's as OP as it was in the last meta. Now I'm only seeing it inside of lava decks for the most part, and even in a lot of lava decks, not all of them are running the Inferno Drag, so I think it was toned down slightly. The Inferno Tower is going to go in C tier. It's kind of an average building. I think it's definitely not as good as things like the Bomb Tower and the Tesla, but with that being said, there are some people using it, especially with the Goblin Drill and inside of Log Bait, so it can be played if you want to as a pretty decent defensive building. The Knight, I'm actually going to put in S tier, and I'm talking about the regular Knight, not the evolved version, because there's so many people, especially inside of cycle decks, running the regular Knight, and they're, instead of using the evolved Knight, having two other strong evolutions that they're pairing with him. For example, a lot of people are using the evolved Goblin Drill and the evolved Skeletons, or maybe they have the evolved Firecracker, or maybe they have the evolved Tesla, and they want to have the regular Knight to support those two evolutions. And you're commonly seeing that now because people are realizing the regular Knight, even the non-evolved version, gets a lot of value for the stats. I mean, he has a lot of health, he's very versatile, which is why the regular version is being used a lot at the moment. And I'm not even saying the regular Knight needs a nerf, he's just being very strong and being very used and versatile at this point in time. The Lava Hound's going to go in A tier. For sure, a very strong win condition and used quite a bit, especially for how expensive the lava is. There's a lot of different variations you can use. Most people prefer to use the balloon with it, but you can, if you want, use a variation without the balloon, maybe with the miner. And I think a thing that really helps the Lava Hound is that dang Void spell that pairs exceptionally well with it. The Lightning is going to go in C tier. It's a spell you can use with the Royal Giant or with the Electro Giant if you want to, but overall, it's not needed in majority of decks nowadays. A lot of people prefer to use a cheaper spell like the Arrows, the Void, or even the Fireball and the Poison, so the usage of the Lightning has gone down quite a bit. And finally, guys, after like 5 nerfs or something like that, the Little Prince is no longer an S tier. I'm actually going to put it in B tier because I don't believe he's the best champion in the game anymore. I think another reason for that is the Void is going to be a really good counter to him as well, but the Little Prince is very good, especially in things like P.E.K.K.A. He's used a lot still. The Lumberjack's going to go in D tier. Golem doesn't really run Lumberjack anymore. The only time you're really going to see it is in Lumberloon Freeze, but that's a pretty off-meta deck anyway. The Magic Archer is going to go in B tier. He's better again by a good amount after the Goblin Drill evolution. A lot of people are running him again because of how well he pairs with that and the regular drill itself, especially with the Tornado. That combination is really obnoxious for people to deal with, and of course you can use him in bridge spam decks if you want, like with the P.E.K.K.A. The Mega Minion's going to go in B tier. It is definitely not as good as the Phoenix, but surprisingly there's still a lot of people that prefer to play the Mega Minion over the Phoenix inside of things like Lava Hound and the Giant, because I guess they want a cheaper alternative that still gets a lot of value in a ton of situations. The Mega Knight's going to go in C tier. Overall, I consider him a below average card. He's slightly better than he was a couple months ago now that the Ram Rider and the Wall Breakers are better, but with that being said, people definitely prefer to use the P.E.K.K.A. over the Mega Knight just for that extra DPS currently. The Mighty Miner's going to go in A tier. I believe he is the strongest champion in the game. I don't think he's quite S tier though, but he is being used more than the Little Prince. There's a lot of decks you can run him in. You can run him with the Hog Rider, you can run him with the Goblin Drill, which are two very strong decks, and there's even Recruit's Mighty Miner decks I'm seeing a good bit. The Duchess nerf helped him tremendously because when you send him in the other lane, he doesn't get melted anymore. The Miner's going to be going in A tier. He is no longer broken and hasn't been for the last few months, but he has remained to be very consistent no matter what the meta is. There's a lot of variety he's good in, very versatile. You can run him in a fast cycle Miner Poison deck if you want, or you can run him inside of a heavier deck like Giant or with the Lava Hound. There's just a lot of different things you can pair him with and have success. The Minion Horde's going to be going in D tier. There's just way too many people running arrows and other splash cards like the Evolved Wizard that they have a very hard time getting value or fitting in any deck. The minions, on the other hand, are going in B tier, and they're a lot more valuable in most situations because even when you're against an arrow deck, it's an even trade, so oftentimes they get value before they end up dying. They're going to pair pretty well with things like the P.E.K.K.A, and also inside of Giant and Giant Graveyard decks, they're commonly seen. The Mini P.E.K.K.A is going to go in C tier. I kind of think of it as an average card. There's not really a deck it needs to be played in, but it's always paired pretty well inside of Sparky decks, and also you can use it with the Giant, where it tends to have pretty good synergy. The Mirror, as per usual, is going in F tier. There's just not really any deck where it needs to be played in, and pretty much almost every single matchup, it's not getting value, because you have to spend more to play the same card, and it makes your cycle incredibly awkward. The Monk is going to go in C tier. I think it's overall a fairly weak champion, definitely better than the Golden Knight though, but the problem for the Monk is it's only good inside of Royal Giant decks. There isn't really another deck you can pair it in besides the RG, so for that reason, it's not versatile enough to be put much higher. The regular Mortar is going in C tier. I feel like the standard version is fairly easy to deal with overall, especially with a lot of the tanks. And the main reason people use Mortar, just like a lot of the other evolutions, is to eventually get to that Evolve version, which is just significantly stronger. The Mother Witch is going in C tier. I think she's slightly stronger in this current meta, especially inside of Bridge Spam decks. I'm seeing some people use her in P.E.K.K.A Bridge Spam as one of their support cards because she tends to get a lot of value against swarmy decks, which can be difficult for P.E.K.K.A to deal with sometimes. The Musketeer's also going in C tier. I'm seeing her a good amount inside of Hog Cycle, of course 2.6, or Loon Cycle you can use her with. But with that being said, there's a lot of better alternatives that are going to be stronger support cards that you could use instead, but she's definitely still okay. The Night Witch is actually going in A tier. She's being used a lot in decks outside of Golem. She's being played with the Giant Graveyard, and also with Elixir Golem, so she is an incredible support card to have at the moment that is pretty versatile. The P.E.K.K.A is going in A tier. She is in an amazing spot in this current meta, but I don't quite think she's in S tier. There's not quite enough people using her to justify putting her in S tier, and I certainly don't think she's broken, but she has a lot of good support cards that are strong, which is helping her be stronger too, especially after the recent buff she got about a few months ago, I want to say at this point. The Battle Ram and the Ram Rider are solid win conditions at this point. The Ram Rider, that buff she got a month ago, has really helped the P.E.K.K.A be a bit better as well, because you oftentimes see that as a combo, and the P.E.K.K.A is going to be pretty good against things like the Giant, which you see a good amount in this meta too. The Phoenix is going to be our next card going in S tier. There are so many people using this card, especially inside of beatdown decks, and there's a lot more people running it than the Mega Minion, which is why I have it in S. Of course, inside of Lava Hound, the Phoenix is going to be a great support card, but not just that. Inside of Royal Giant, you almost always see it. You could use it inside of P.E.K.K.A if you want to too. You could use it with the Giant. You can use it with the Evo Goblin Giant. It pairs very well in all of those decks, which is why across the board in beatdown, you almost are always going to see the Phoenix inside of those decks. The Poison I'm going to put in A tier. I don't quite think it deserves S tier because I think the Poison is at around the same level as the Fireball, and I think things like the Arrows and the Void and the Log are just better than the poison by a bit, which is why I have it in A. But the poison, of course, pairs exceptionally well with the evolved Goblin Drill or even the regular Goblin Drill, which so many people are running. And also the Goblin Curse nerf kind of indirectly helped the poison, because a lot of people that were running the Goblin Curse weren't using poison in the same deck. So now poison is back and very strong again. The Prince I'm also going to put in A tier. They nerfed his charge by half a tile, so now he's not as broken anymore after the massive charge buff he got, but he is still well above average and being used a ton, especially with the Giant and the Goblin Giant. But you can also run him in Prince Bait if you want to as well, so he's quite versatile and still very strong after the small nerf he got. The Princess is going to be in B tier. She's definitely not as OP as she was when the Dagger Duchess was broken. When that was the case, she was one of the strongest cards in the game. Now that the Duchess is worse, she was toned back a bit, because for the most part now, you're mostly only going to see her inside of log bait decks, with a couple exceptions here and there. The Rage is going to be going in B tier as well. It's a very good support card in this current meta, especially with the Elixir Golem and the Royal Giant it's commonly seen. The Ramrod is also going to be going in B tier. After the buff she got, she was pretty good, but not quite to the point of the Prince, but they still decided to give her the same nerf as the Prince, and as a result, she still remains to be worse than the Prince, but she still definitely benefited from the buff, which is why you see her a lot more paired with the P.E.K.K.A. The Rascals are going in C tier. The Prince buff and the Evolved Goblin Barrel definitely helped them a bit, and now they're used a bit more, but they're still fairly easy to deal with and not that strong. The Rocket's going in B tier. Definitely a very solid spell, but not nearly as broken as when it was the Dagger Duchess meta. Now the Rocket is mostly being played with Expo and the Goblin Drill, but it's not out of hand, because a lot of those decks you can use another spell if you want, like the Fireball, for example, or the Poison, and then of course Log Bait you always see the Rocket with. The Delivery is going in C tier. Defensively, it's a very good spell, but it doesn't really do anything on offense, which I think is the major problem for it, but it's going to be very good inside of minor control decks and inside of Pig Cycle. Believe it or not, guys, the Ghost is going in S tier. Normally, I place him in A or B, but he's a very good counter to the Goblin Drill, which I think is why his usage rate is so much higher now. You are always seeing him with the Royal Giant and with P.E.K.K.A. in this current meta, but there's actually a lot of people running Goblin Drill and pairing the Goblin Drill with the Ghost just because of how strong he is and how good of a counter to the Drill he is. And not only that is he a good counter to the Drill, he does splash damage, he's invisible, only 3 elixir, just a very versatile card that gets a lot of value throughout the match. The regular Royal Giant's going to go in C tier. Now, the Royal Giant is being played a fair amount, but pretty much everyone running him is running the evolved version, which is why the regular version I can't really put much higher than an average card. The Royal Hogs are going in B tier. There's a little bit more people using them again now that recruits are a little bit stronger. After the Duchess nerf, recruits Hogs are viable once again, and then of course Pig Cycle you can use too. The evolved Royal recruits are better again, but the regular recruits still remain to be in D tier. Everyone running the recruits have the evolved version. The regular ones still suck because you're not getting as much value out of them. They don't charge, so they're going to be still pretty easy to deal with, which is why, kind of like the Barbarians and the Archers, that's why they're in D tier. The Skeleton Army is going to go in D tier. It is a pretty weak card overall, but it is ever so slightly kind of viable again now that the Goblin Curse is a lot worse. So if you really want to, you could run it inside a Balloon Freeze, or you could run it inside of a Graveyard deck, but it still sucks for the most part. It's the same case with the Skeleton Barrel, which is also going to go in D tier. For the most part, you can only pair it inside of a Recruit spam deck, but that deck isn't too strong in the meta either. The Skeleton Dragons are going in A tier. They're an incredibly strong support card that you often see with the Lava Hound, but you can also run them in decks like Mortar. You can pair them also even inside of the Royal Giant if you want to as well. So a few different options, and they're really nice for spell bait. The Elixir Golem's gonna go in B tier. He pairs very well with Elixir Golem, which is used a lot in this current meta, but besides Elixir Golem, you don't see him in many other decks. You don't really see him with the Graveyard anymore, which is why I can't really put him higher than B. The Skeletons are going to be joining the Goblins in S tier. I think kind of like the Goblins, you just constantly see them inside of cycle decks. You can also use them in some heavier decks too. Of course, the Skeletons are going to pair very well with the Royal Giant. So basically, any cycle deck that doesn't have the Goblins is going to have the Skeletons, which is kind of my reasoning for having them in S tier. And both the Goblins and the Skeletons are being used more than the Guards, which is why I have my ranking the way it is. The Sparky's going in C tier. The Giant is in a very good spot as a win condition, which the Sparky pairs well with, but the biggest problem for the Sparky is with how strong Void is, it's difficult for the Sparky to get value because the Void takes out the Sparky for only 3 Elixir, which is kind of keeping Sparky from being too strong. The Spear Goblins are going in B tier. They're definitely better now after the Dagger Duchess nerf and also the recent Spear Goblin buff. You commonly see them paired with the Goblin Drill or inside of minor cycle decks, where they tend to get a decent amount of value. The regular Tesla's going in B tier. After the Tesla nerf, the regular Tesla is definitely a bit worse now. The main reason people use it is to get to the evolved version. The regular one is definitely significantly weaker, and there's a lot of interactions that have changed, which is why I only have it in B tier instead of A. And once again, Log is going in S tier. Every single cycle deck for the most part is going to have it, whether it's Goblin Drill, Expo, Hog, Royal Hog Cycle, Royal Giant, and it's pretty much the only spell in the game that is used more than the Arrows and Void, and I really think that speaks volumes and really goes to show how the Log remains to be dominant no matter what the meta is. I mean, it's only 2 Elixir, you get that knockback ability, there's just so many reasons to use the Log. The Three Musketeers, guys, I'm actually going to put in F tier. They're in a horrendous spot at the moment because the Elixir Collector is really bad and almost impossible to use, which means the Three Musketeers are basically dead. And I believe the Three Musketeers might not be able to recover unless they get a small buff, especially with the state of the game at the moment. With all these evolutions getting added, it's becoming more and more difficult to run the Three Musketeers. The Tombstone is going in B tier. For the most part, you're only going to see it inside of Lava Hound decks. It used to be inside of Graveyard, it used to be with the Royal Giant, but now it's pretty much exclusively only seen with the Lava Hound, which is why I can't justify putting it any higher than B. The Tornado is going in A tier. Normally I put it in S tier, but I think there's spells that are just a lot stronger than it, like the Arrows, the Log, and the Void, which definitely deserve S, and I think Tornado is more of A tier. Of course, don't get me wrong, it's getting a ton of value from the King activations, but I don't think it's as versatile as it used to be back in the day, because a lot of Graveyard decks don't really run the Tornado anymore. They prefer to use the Arrows, which is what you always see, especially inside of Giant Graveyard. But of course, the Tornado does pair very well with the Evolved Goblin Drill. Some people are using that with the Evo Bomber or the Magic Archer, for example, but I think overall the Tornado isn't as broken as it once was. The Valkyrie's going to go in C tier. I think one of the main reasons people use the Valkyrie is to get to the evolved version eventually, which of course is going to be much more powerful. But the Valkyrie is being played a tiny bit more, probably because of how good the evolved Goblin Drill is, and she's going to be an okay counter to that. Also, you do see her from time to time with the Goblin Drill inside of the Magic Archer Tornado variation, but most people prefer to use the Knight over her in just about every deck. And obviously, the Void is going straight in S tier, by far one of the strongest spells in the game, especially in beatdown decks. It seems like in beatdown, it is pretty much a requirement at the moment. If you're playing a Lava Hound deck, you're always going to have the Void. If you're running a Royal Giant deck, you're likely going to have the Void. A Giant deck, you're probably going to have the Void. P.E.K.K.A deck, you name it. Electro Giant, you could run the Void. I could go on and on, but when you're running a heavier deck, you oftentimes are going to have it. You can use it in a cheaper deck if you want to as well, but then that's when you commonly see different spells. But with Beatdown, you always see it, and it's just getting a absurd amount of value, helping you break through buildings and taking out support cards. The regular wall breakers are going in B tier. They're definitely a lot stronger now after the Dagger Duchess nerf. They have kind of been revived a little bit, so you see them every once in a while inside of a Mega Knight deck, or you could use them inside of a cycle deck with the Miner or even with the Goblin Drill. The Witch is going in F tier. She's just very weak, especially to spells like the Poison and the Fireball, and even just a lot of support cards tend to do very well with her, and she has a very hard time fitting in decks. Sure, you might see her in an off-meta Giant Graveyard deck, but pretty much every option is going to be better, and I think it would be fine if she got a small buff. It's kind of a similar case for the Wizard, but of course he's being played a lot more because of his evolution. So I don't really want to put him in F tier because I think it would be a problem if the regular Wizard got a buff, especially with how strong his evolution is. And the regular Wizard itself tends to get some value here and there, especially with how strong the Goblin Drill is in the meta. He tends to be a decent counter against that. The Expo's going in C tier, definitely not too great of a win condition, kind of average or even slightly below average. I think a big part of that is because there's a good amount of tanks that are pretty good against it, and also the Void is a good spell against it because you're going to have to overcommit just to protect your Expo, which can be annoying in a lot of situations. The regular Zap is going in C tier. I think the main reason people play it is to get to the evolved version. However, I have seen it used slightly more inside of things like P.E.K.K.A. and Lava Hound because people want to use two other evolutions besides the Evo Zap, so it's slightly better than it was a month or two ago. The Zappies are going in D tier. There's just not really any deck you're seeing them in. They used to be played all the time with the Royal Giant or with Recruits, but that's not really the case anymore. Majority of the Recruit decks do not have the Zappies, and that's the same case with the Royal Giant, so they're just a fairly weak support card and have a hard time finding a deck to pair themselves in this meta. As for the Tower Troops, the Princess is going in S tier. She is finally the strongest Tower Troop in the game once again, and honestly, I think a lot of people prefer that that's the case because, of course, she's the one that's the least pay to win because she's the OG Tower Troop inside of the game, and it helps, I feel like, keep things consistent for a lot of people because they already know her interactions, and she is just slightly better than the other two Tower Troops at the moment, which is why most top ladder players and people in competitive are using her the most. After the big nerf the Dagger Duchess got, though, the Cannoneer is actually the second best Tower Troop in the game. Now, he's not as good as the Princess Tower, though, because ever since he got that 5% DPS nerf, the Princess Tower has been stronger. But in a couple decks, for example, there's some people maybe inside of Royal Giant decks or inside of some cycle decks preferring to run the Cannoneer, but you're only going to typically see that about 10 or 20% of the time. Most of the time, you certainly prefer the Princess Tower over him. And for the last Tower Troop, the Dagger Duchess, I'm going to put her in B tier. I think she is the worst. I think she's even worse than the Cannoneer slightly. The only deck that I have seen her in recently is some people running Elixir Golem for some reason are running her inside of Elixir Golem over the other two Tower Troops, but that's the only deck I've seen so far. Every other deck I've seen either the Cannoneer or the Princess Tower, so I think the Duchess is slightly the worst in the game, but overall I think the Tower Troops are all in a pretty good spot because the Princess Tower is the best, but not by a ton. It's quite close overall. And lastly, guys, here's my evolution ranking. I'm doing it separately again because in the last tier list, I did it separate and most of you guys preferred that. So I'll continue doing that from this point onwards when I do tier lists. So as per usual, the Evolve Ice Spirit is the worst evolution. Pretty much the only deck you're going to see it in is in Royal Hog Cycles. Some people run it in that, but that's about it. And overall, you're better off using a better Evo. The Evolved Goblin Barrel also is pretty weak, even though the Duchess is worse. it's just not used all that much because it's pretty obvious where the fake one is going to be. The Evolved Barbarians are also pretty bad at the moment because pretty much you're only going to see them inside of Lava Hound decks, but a lot of people are actually preferring to use the Evolved Valkyrie and the Evolved Zap over the Evolved Barbarians even in Lava. The Evolved Battle Ram isn't that great because it's really difficult for it to get value, especially if it's running into an Evolved Tesla, which so many people are using at the moment, and there's just a lot of resets, so you're able to reset it and prevent it from connecting to your tower pretty easily. The Evolved Goblin Giant isn't the worst evolution, which we thought it was when it came out, that it was possibly going to be the worst evolution in the game. That has proven to not be the case, but it is still definitely on the weaker end, and it's just difficult to get a ton of value out of it sometimes, but in some situations the goblin spawning can be pretty good. The Evolved Wall Breakers are certainly a bit better after the Dagger Duchess nerf, but they're definitely still a below average evolution, but they definitely are better, especially against the Duchess and especially when you're against a Princess Tower. The Evolved Mortar, ever since it got its health bonus removed, it has been significantly worse since then because pretty much the main benefit you're getting now is that goblin that comes out of it in the slightly quicker fire rate, but it's just significantly easier to deal with, and there's a lot of tanks you can get in front of it, and things like the Void, Earthquake are going to wipe it out pretty easily. The Evolved Bats, they heal, so that's going to be pretty good. They're definitely better than the regular bats, but I think in general, because of how many people are using arrows in this meta, they're going to be wiped out quite easily. Now, the recruits, the Evolved Recruits were one of the worst evolutions in the game not too long ago, but after the Dagger Duchess nerf, they're around average at this point. They are seen significantly more, and them charging is really annoying to deal with in a lot of situations. The Evolved Royal Giant is definitely better than the regular Royal Giant because of that knockback. You're unable to play certain ground cards next to him because he'll knock them back, dealing damage. So, of course, against a building, there's going to be no benefit, but there are a lot of situations where having it evolved is going to be useful, which is why everyone using the Royal Giant is going to have the evolved one for the most part. The Evolved Archers are not super OP, especially because of how many people are running arrows, but pretty much everyone running the Archers is going to have the evolved version, and they're going to be very valuable inside of things like Expo, where you commonly see them, or Giant Graveyard. The Firecracker, a lot better after the Duchess nerf, which is why the Evolved Firecracker I would consider a slightly above average evolution now. Even though before I thought she was below average, she is definitely better now that the Hog is a lot better after the Duchess nerf, and the Firecracker, of course, pairs very well with the Hog Rider. The Drill is also in a great spot in this meta, and the Firecracker pairs very well with the Goblin Drill as well. The Evolved Knight, definitely not as broken as he was anymore. After, I don't know how many nerfs it's been, 4 or 5, finally he is no longer one of the most broken evolutions in the game. In fact, a lot of people are preferring to use the regular Knight over the Evolved Knight, and there might even be more people using the regular Knight compared to the Evolved one, so it shows you don't need to use the Evolved version anymore, and a lot of people prefer to use other evolutions over the Evo Knights, such as the Evolved Goblin Drill, or the Evo Skeletons, or the Evo Tesla, which you'll often see the regular Knight used with. The Evolved Valkyrie is very, very good, and I would actually say she's on the level of the Evolved Knight at the moment, especially inside of Lava Hound decks, and paired with the Goblin Drill, you are seeing her a ton. She's also a good counter to the Evolved Goblin Drill. The Evolved Bomber, very good, even after now that it's a 2-cycle evolution. Still remains to be incredibly strong for only 2 elixir. You're getting a win condition that you can play at the bridge. It's going to be very good with the Tornado as well, lining everything up, and you can end up getting an absurd amount of value. The Evolved Skeleton's only 1 elixir, and sometimes this card can single-handedly win you the game, especially depending on the matchup and the cycle your opponent has. Now, with that being said, there are some matchups where it's not really going to do anything. So sometimes it's matchup dependent, but it can win you a game alone in certain matchups, which is why it is incredibly broken, and you have so many opportunities to get value out of it throughout the match because of how cheap it is. The Evolved Wizard, even though the shield now gets taken off by arrows, has still remained to be very strong, especially on defense. It's ridiculous how much value he gets because it's pretty much impossible to kill when it's on your opponent's side of the map just because of his immunity to spells. The Evolved Zap is incredible inside of beatdown decks like Lava Hound, Giant, Golem, not really Golem, Golem's not great in the meta, but every heavy deck at the moment, for the most part, is running the Evolved Zap. It's kind of like the Phoenix, you're just constantly seeing it inside of heavier decks, and its usage rate is insanely high, especially because of how good Lava Hound is at the moment. The Evolved Tesla, even after the nerf that the Tesla got, the Evolved Tesla has remained to be very strong because of the stun. The stun is ridiculous, and the fact that it has the death stun too adds even more value on top of the ridiculous amount of value it already gets. When you have an Evolved Tesla down, it is so difficult for your opponent to break through it. It's pretty much guaranteed defense every single time, no matter what push is coming your way, which is why it is so broken. And lastly, the Evolved Goblin Drill. It might be too soon to say, but I do believe it might be the strongest evolution in the game at the moment. Bare minimum, it is top 3. It just came out. There's so many people having success with it at the top of ladder, even though you had to spend money for it. It is so hard to deal with, even if you go in for a drill counter on top of it. When it loses some of its health, it moves away. So then it's still going to get damage, and the drill counter has to work its way up to it. And if you're pairing something like a tornado with it, or something to push back the unit, then it has to go even farther. It has to walk even further just to go to the evolved drill that ended up moving. There's tons of goblins that come out of it. It's getting death damage every single time it respawns, so it's no wonder why it is getting so much value. So this is my evolution ranking. Let me know what you guys think about the tier lists of all the cards, the evolution tier list. And if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you guys are not subscribed already. These videos take me a long time to make, so I'm really glad you guys do enjoy them, and as long as I continue receiving a lot of support on these types of videos, I plan to continue doing them. So thank you guys for all the support, and I'm glad you really enjoy these tier lists. And with that being said, I guess that's pretty much going to be it. Thanks again. Until next time, guys.